Hello, seventh grade. Welcome back from spring break. Hope you guys had a good time. I got this during spring break, don't ask. Um, Also went out to Lake Samish State Park, had lunch out there, it was nice. And went out to Conway, looked at the tulips, went to the nursery there, got some plants for the front deck there, and also went out to Wenatchee River, Blewett Pass. All right, so last time we talked about the Great War, and it's not great because it was good. It's great because it was the biggest one anyone's seen up until that point. Well, World War One, and so we talked about sort of the roots of it and early years in it. So now we're going to talk about United States involvement. So originally, the U.S. pledged neutrality. Woodrow Wilson was the president at the time, and we continue our long tradition of making money during war, selling supplies and food to the belligerents, the people fighting. Although the United Kingdom is our number one trading partner at this time. So in May 1915, the Lusitania sunk. There's 128 Americans on board. It's a British ship. There's actually 50 tons of munitions on board. And so this is all part of a bigger idea of Germany trying to restrict supplies coming into Europe. And so they did what's called unrestricted submarine warfare. So they basically sunk any ship flying a United Kingdom flag, and sometimes even sank U.S. ships, although very infrequently. But creates a lot of bad feelings, obviously, and so they open it. They stop after the Lusitania, but open it back up in 1917. Also, about this time, there's something called the Zimmermann Telegram, which is intercepted, and it's basically authorizing the German ambassador to go to Mexico and say, hey, if you go to war with the United States, you can have all that land back that they took from you. So again, needless to say, that wasn't looked upon well. So the U.S. declares war. They had passed a bill in February 1917 to expand the U.S. military. And then there was more unrestricted submarine warfare, as I mentioned. And Wilson asked Congress to declare war in April. And they do. Pretty one-sided votes, 82-6 in the Senate, 373-50 in the House. The United States goes to war. So here in Washington, lumber industry and agriculture farming both take off. In fact, the lumber industry is so short they actually send soldiers out for a while to work cutting down trees. And wood is used in all kinds of things, especially in World War One. Anything from ships to planes to crates to ship supplies, pallets, etc. Boeing was founded, started supplying planes for the war, mostly observation planes. And then women filled men's places in the labor force. This picture down below here is actually from Todd Shipyard. As you can see, several women working there during the war. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the U.S. involvement in the war. I am going to talk about this one battle, the Meuse-Argonne. That's the first sort of battle that the United States really has its full forces there in World War One. And so, as you can see, they bear the brunt of the casualties, but it helps bring the war to a close. The Germans see what I put here as the American material wealth, indiscriminate use of artillery, new uniforms, a lot of good food. And one of the things the German soldiers noticed is that how well fed and clothed the U.S. soldiers were whenever they captured them or went through the dead bodies. And so this kind of helps bring the war to a close because even though the Germans have defeated Russia in the east and can bring some additional forces to the west, they realize that with the U.S. involved now, it's not going to happen. So World War One costs over 20 million lives lost, civilian and military together. The war itself cost over $300 billion. There's some land issues that were created that bleed right into World War II. The idea of total war becomes an accepted concept. So, entire countries gearing up to go to war, not just a small professional force fighting, but everybody both in the home front and what we call drafting or conscripting everyday citizens into the army to fight. The economy in the U.S. and Washington stumbles. A lot of government contracts are canceled. So there's a slight dip in the economy, buying, selling, trading. And again, that's both in the U.S. and Washington. And then race issues are highlighted in the U.S. The Great Northward Migration takes place during World War One. So not only were women filling jobs, there were a lot of blacks from the South coming up north and working in meatpacking plants and factories, and sort of replacing those that were leaving to go fight overseas. So as if this wasn't bad enough, Spanish influenza breaks out. The avian origin simply means that it comes from birds originally. About a third of the world's population at the time is infected, or 500 million people. 50 million die worldwide, 675,000 in the U.S. It's probably the true first epidemic in the world, and part of that is just global troop movements, spreads it all over the world, so that it's not isolated to a region or a continent. So here's just a map showing you everywhere that it had spread, and again, 50 million die in this Spanish flu. So you wouldn't think the 1920s would be that great, but things pick up. Just some notes here from the 1920s. The 19th Amendment is ratified in 1920. If you don't know what that is, you should look it up. Industries grow quite a bit, and they produce affordable luxury items such as cars. Electricity starts to come into homes, so you have a lot of appliances, radios, things that were kind of the you know, just the rich people had before upper class citizens. We also have the Harlem Renaissance, and jazz takes off. So there's a picture of Louis Armstrong there in the upper corner. And this is Zora Neale Hurston here. And so she wrote a book called Their Eyes Were Watching God. But perhaps less known is a book she wrote called Barracoon, which is actually, she interviews the last person that came over in the slave trade. So actually taken from Africa and brought here, and she interviews this person. And then stock market surges. Its highest ever value was in 1919. And then it doubles that value. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's going to lead to some problems later on, but we'll talk about that later. So 1920s in Washington, Washington state legislators, they passed an alien land law in 1921. Basically, anyone who's not white cannot own land in Washington. So this is sort of the beginning of what we'll call isolationism and protectionism. There's still quite a bit of trade going on, but this kind of highlights, both looking inward and racial prejudices, not wanting Chinese or Japanese to come in and buy land in Washington state. Seattle elects Bertha K. Landis as the first woman mayor of a major city in 1926. And Boeing Field itself is dedicated in Seattle on July 26, 1928. That picture there is actually from a few years before that, before it was actually made into an official airstrip. It's kind of a Coney Island amusement park is what's going on in that area originally. All right, so that was quick. It was fast. I know. Please feel free to pause at any point, go back and watch. I'm just trying to lay some groundwork as we move into the Great Depression. So what I want you to do in the comments today is I want you to put some aspect of the 1920s that interests you and why it does. So you may have to look up a couple things on your own. I don't want any repeats. You could potentially pick something that someone else found interesting, but for your own reasons. If I see anything that repeats a previous comment, then I'm not going to count it. And if you have any questions about that, just shoot me a quick email. All right, good to be back at it, and hope to talk to all of you soon. Let's see, we're all set up for Thursday. Talk about your essays. All right, take care.